Good.
Rhonda, here, welcome to Denmark.
Thank you. It's good to be here in Denmark with you, my dear Lona.
And this is Anna, and Anna and myself. We have, for many years, we have been admiring your work, and we would like to bring this social justice thing into our work with mindfulness. Can you explain what is socially engaged mindfulness? How do you understand that?
Yeah. So, for me, socially engaged mindfulness is really, it's pointing to a variety of different ways that we can take the practices, the teaching, the philosophy associated with mindfulness, the science of mindfulness, and sort of apply it to the realm of our social existence, our social lives. Mm-hmm. And so it really is, again, it's sort of a pointing toward an orientation toward how we apply mindfulness, so that we move from thinking of mindfulness as simply this sort of hyper-individual personal practice for focusing the mind and for enhancing our personal well-being, all of which is really important, right? I always think of that as like, in a way, the doorway in, each of us being, agentic beings who are trying to make the most of our lives, often come to mindfulness with those legitimate kinds of desires and expectations. And yet, if we fail to recognize that the sense that we have of ourselves as hyper-individuated, isolated, and separate from others is really not the whole story, and we're always embedded in a social world, then we can begin to think about how these practices, teachings, the research, all of the things that we associate with mindfulness can just as well help us understand and address more effectively the suffering that is only present or that is showing up in our lives as a result of how we've organized ourselves socially. So we're looking at not just individual, personal suffering, but kind of socially mediated suffering. In the words of some of us who look at this work, we think of social suffering as a kind of surplus suffering, in the sense that there's suffering that may be inherent in existence for individuals. In the teachings underlying mindfulness, we think of that suffering as coming from traditionally greed, hatred, or delusion, the three sort of root causes of suffering that any individual may experience. But then the question is, what about the additional kinds of pain, suffering, dissatisfaction that people in the world experience because of the way we've organized ourselves socially, including the maldistribution or uneven distribution of the resources for thriving that we see when we just look around. And so really bringing the light of awareness, the light of mindfulness to bear on understanding the socially mediated suffering, that surplus suffering, is, I think, what socially engaged mindfulness is about.
In Denmark, I think there is a lot of ignorance related to privilege. How do we begin this conversation? Because we don't want to look there. We want to be equal, and we want to be nice.
Yes. I even heard some people say that they find it offensive to be called privileged.
Yes.
Because it sounds like they're just spoiled.
Yes.
And they are. So they don't want to be associated with being privileged.
Most of us don't want to necessarily be thought of as, sort of spoiled or all of that. But so the challenges we have discussing some of these aspects of this social inequality that we know is sort of just a part of life, are not limited to here in Denmark. I think, you know, in the United States where I live, it's also not easy to talk about privilege at all. It's not easy right now, given the current kind of political situation we're in, but it's actually never been easy to, you know, belly up to a conversation in which, you know, what we're called to do is really be open to acknowledging some of the ways that histories of systemic advantage and disadvantage tied to social identities, tied to, again, these different realities that pertain to how we've organized ourselves socially, who gets to be a citizen, who gets to have full and equal access to, for example, the right to vote or, to participate in the process by which we make the rules. Societies, you know, kind of run on these systems that end up often, I'm a sociologist at heart as well as a law professor and a mindfulness teacher, so often in sociology we think about the, you know, patterns that we see across cultures, across these real differences that exist amongst nations and different places in the world, regions. We see differences, but we see similarities. And across these regions and these places and spaces in our social world, you see persistent practices by which we name different groups in the society. We identify people according to different social characteristics, and we give those groups different hierarchical rankings in terms of value. So it may be based on gender, or in the U.S. we make a lot of the concept of race. So categories of racial identity are very strong. They have a whole historical set of dynamics that change but somehow persist in certain ways. But gender-based differences, age-based differences, you know, status around immigration or religion, across cultures we see categorizing of groups around these different social identities, and then some kind of ranking of who has more access to the resources for making the rules and all of the different decisions that can flow from that. And it's looking at the consequences of those practices to see who in our world right now is therefore, you know, more or less in a position to experience the accretion of privilege, of advantage, right? This is when we talk about privilege, we're talking about, are there more or less unearned advantages that some of us are experiencing in certain contexts because of these social patterns and practices that happen today but often have legacies in our histories. So has there been a history of advantaging certain groups such that resources have accumulated amongst folks who are identified by others as being in that group? Greater access to education, greater wealth, better housing, better health care. And even in cultures that are, you know, more or less attentive to inequality and are seeking to, you know, regulate the distribution so that there is less intense inequality, even in those cultures there may be, again, these historical legacies of people who maybe came before or who are identified as being a part of the group that came before, and therefore when we move through the world, we may be more or less the beneficiary of these sort of unearned access points. You're accepted better here. A sense of belonging is easier for some people than others. By contrast, if you are, you know, maybe identified as a more marginalized group member, a member of a group who historically maybe wasn't here or wasn't entitled to certain access, then you may, again, move through the world in ways that lead you to experience disproportionate degrees of disadvantage. So none of this is set in stone. None of this is like, if you're in this category, that means you're necessarily privileged. If you're in this category, it means you're necessarily disadvantaged. So what can happen, though, is that with mindfulness and with an interest in this aspect of our experience, we can just become more curious. Is it the case that some of what we've experienced historically in terms of the identification of different groups and the consequences of our history, is it showing up in our lives today? Are there places and spaces where certain people are more or less able to experience a sense of belonging and a sense of access relative to others? And really, mindfulness of those things is an example of socially engaged mindfulness.
Then from your story and also my story, that we share the great belonging for a grandmother that has been into music and into Christianity and into spirituality. And how do you see this today, that this grandmother kindness, or this that we heal together, that it's not a personal thing, but it's like a grandmother music or humming or
these different legacies? Yeah, of course. So one of the things that 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 I've shared before is that I came into mindfulness after having been raised in a home in the United States where my grandmother was a strong figure in my life when I was a little girl. For a variety of reasons. My parents were splitting up is the main reason. So I was actually spending a lot of time with my grandmother. And she, when I was a little girl, had been called to the ministry. So she had been called to a Christian ministry, actually. And that's kind of unusual for women in the United States at that time. And certainly also for Black women. But nevertheless, my grandmother was called. My grandmother name. So she was this really strong kind of spiritual figure in our community. Now, she had to work for a living outside of the home. So during the week, she didn't have fancy work. She cleaned houses for other people. Not uncommon for women of her generation with relatively little education. Again, when you talk about privilege and disadvantage and its legacies, Black women in the southern part of the United States, when my grandmother was born, she was born in the early 1900s, you just often didn't have opportunities like the kind that I've even had at all. So she didn't go to school for very long, and she ended up, being a housekeeper, working in tobacco fields, like very working class, very few resources. But nevertheless, she had found her way into a sense of herself as a spiritual teacher. And so she would get up every day. And even as a little girl, I saw her have a very serious commitment to arising before she had to, like getting up before dawn and engaging in, 30, 45 minutes, an hour of her own centering practice before then getting dressed and getting ready for the outside world work she had to do. But in the interim, like getting us all up, making sure we had breakfast, getting us off to where we needed to go. And so for me, it was that experience of having this grandmother who clearly had a sense of her own value and worth, and a way of like grounding herself in that as a foundation for whatever she might do in the day. In a way, it was like she just knew that her actions mattered. She knew that there was a way she could take whatever limited opportunities she had and just make the most of them. And so I think for me, growing up, seeing her example was, on the one hand, a sort of an inspiration. I think I really had the sense that if my grandmother could do the best she could with her limited opportunities, I could make the most of mine, relatively more advantaged and privileged circumstances that I was growing in the post-civil rights era in the United States, where women like me did have other opportunities. But also, in particular, seeing her ground herself every day. Fast forward to me having gone to university, gotten a graduate degree in sociology, and then going to law school. I was a young lawyer in San Francisco, and at a certain point I realized all the different ways I've been trained. And by the way, I was also trained as a military officer in that. So I was a lieutenant in the Army. Wow. But all the different ways I've been trained, I felt like there was something missing. None of them had this sort of effect of helping me really feel the mattering of my existence in the way that my grandmother's very simple, everyday practice of centering really seemed to be foundational to her feeling that she mattered. And so there was some way in which I was like ready to start my first job as a lawyer in San Francisco, and I was just like, I knew I needed something because I was stressed. I couldn't relax. I was like constantly looking for something to do, which is what, higher education culture can do to us sometimes, right? And I had been a student for so long. And so basically I kind of remembered my grandmother's practices. And for me, I was called to examine different ways of bringing that kind of commitment to centering into the world. And so meditation was one. I wasn't as much drawn to prayer at the time, but now I see a role for prayer. So I do see that it really is about finding our own doorway into practices that help us resource ourselves and get in touch with our highest and best on a regular basis, that are culturally resonant for us. And this is how I think of these things today. And so our grandmothers are with us. And maybe not the grandmother in particular, but it's a metaphor to me now for people in our heritage and cultures, our families, without whom we wouldn't be here, right? Really recognizing the power and value of those almost organic awareness and centering practices, and finding a way to bring that into conversation with mindfulness is part of what my work is about. I call that work soulfulness practice. So these days I've been trying to bring that more to the fore in my mindfulness work.
Yeah. So would you say that just by focusing on one's own practice, you're actually doing something for other people? Because I'm thinking what you used to do with law and the military and sociology, that's very focused on what's outside of you. But once you started focusing on mindfulness and your own practice, that actually gave you a feeling of bringing something different to the table for other people as well.
Yes. There is for me an important way that this sort of inner work dimension is really, at least for me, it feels essential to making the most of whatever other kinds of skills and work you have to do. In other words, it's really hard, I think, to withstand some of the challenges that can come, again, in any human life, no matter how relatively privileged or disadvantaged. We all have in common that we suffer in similar ways. And the work that we can do, especially at this time, may be wonderful. We may have all the opportunities. For me, it was great to have the opportunity to become a lawyer and a professor ultimately, and all these things that I was able to do. that were different from what my grandmother could do. The fact that we have advantages and opportunities today doesn't mean it's not hard, right? It doesn't mean we don't suffer. And for me, there were definitely ways that I often would feel the need for some additional support for me then to be able to be a lawyer, a law professor, to be of benefit in the world, given all the stresses and challenges of this time. So I do think that as we may begin from a place of needing to kind of be able to ground ourselves, center ourselves, deal with our stress, become more resilient personally, there is a very definite benefit of that for whatever else it is that we are able to do in the world. And there's also, even apart from the explicit work that we do, there's just a way that these practices can get us in touch with a different way of being that can almost like help us sort of radiate a kind of a different positive energy, no matter what we're doing. So whether we're talking about being a lawyer in a different kind of way or just meeting people in the world in a different kind of way, it's a way of accessing the power, I think, of being alive. And that's something that you can transmit, and we can feel when we're together in these ways.
I think about what is missing, and the grandmother love in the world, I think, is missing.
Yeah.
And then I've thought about how does that look for me? And for me, it is like a sense of safety, like I just a place where I can feel safe, and also. How I admired my grandmother is that she had a sense of dignity, and I think it comes with doing the right thing. And I'm wondering, like, we are middle-aged women now, and we have young women here also, and this is such an important time now. So how do we place our energy to with dignity and to make some safe spaces for more people where they can feel love and also have the opportunity to express their love.
I love this question. I love this question. Thank you for just naming this sort of grandmother energy and describing it from your perspective as, like, in a way, just like dignity and safety. And also, I thank you for just pointing toward this sort of intergenerational moment that is here, right? And that is kind of in the room of the conversation that we're having, but also that there is this way that part of what ails humankind is that we make it, again, more or less safe to acknowledge different aspects of human experience. We pointed a little bit to some of those differences around showing up through identities. And I've even pointed to, like, gender is one identity category that can cause some pain and suffering in individual cases and in different patterns. But age is another. And so trying to figure out how to be in right relationship over time. And as we come into the different roles that we play, I don't have my own children, therefore I'm not personally going to be a grandmother, but I have the nieces and the nephews and the former students and the current students. And so when I hear this idea of grandmother energy, it resonates in a way with me, even though technically I don't have grandchildren. I guess what I'm hearing in what you're saying is that part of what socially engaged mindfulness can support us in doing is attending to the different ways that our societies make it more or less safe to be more fully who we are as we are. And again, implicit when we talk about grandmother energy is there are these gender-based patterns, age-related patterns of who gets to show up and how we get to show up. Yeah, I'm curious what comes up for you, but for me it's, women of a certain age are not always given voice. That sort of energy of love and dignity and taking care and nurturing energy is sometimes denigrated in dominant society. It's like, you're not to be taken seriously if you actually open the door to caring for everybody, to being in your body and recognizing that sometimes we just need to sing together. Sometimes we need to dance together to help us heal, right? Not all of the institutional and other spaces where power resides have been open to these different energies and this different way of being that you're pointing to when we talk about grandmother energy. And so for me, it's really important for me just to name that those dimensions are often left out, have been left out of academia, have been left out of law, to say nothing of military service, but like to just say, it's a kind of repair and balancing work that we're talking about, because dominance and domination, as it has moved through all our different types of societies, often doesn't make space for what we're talking about here. And so to balance and bring in a sense of wholeness and integration, we have to make space for the grandmothers and grandfathers. Really, I think it's partly a call for intergenerational reckoning and responsibility and care, remembering the legacies of our past. But it's also, in particular, there is a gender dimension. It is about balancing the energies around gender and what gets left out there.
But I also think when it's lacking within the institutions, then sometimes it can be reinvented as something that's very scientific, like breathing or yoga or meditation or love. But if love is an action, like bell hooks say, so how do we get to action? Either within institutions or outside institutions, so we can include people or make these rooms accessible, because more and more people feel, and especially young people feel isolated and lonely.
Well, in the work that I do, I have often said that there are many who've come before who inspire me. People like Martin Luther King Jr., people like bell hooks, people have spoken about what we in law, philosophy, in academia, social justice work called justice, but who use the word love to describe that. Like, in other words, Martin Luther King Jr., when he talked about justice, he often would talk about it as love, correcting that which stands against love, or, it's sort of a love in action. Cornel West, who's a philosopher, contemporary philosopher in the United States, refers to justice as what love looks like in public. So definitely there's been a way for me that, kind of coming back home to our own power, feeling a sense of our own mattering and our own inherent belonging, to me is sort of the secret benefit of mindfulness, actually. And from that place of having more of a grounded sense, I already matter, I already belong, life somehow has called me forth just like it's called all of us forth. Like, so it's both sort of dignifying and empowering personally, but it's not limited to me. It's like, it's just like life itself, right? Creates space for all the dignities around us. And to me, then to act from that place is in action. It is a kind of love in action that is by itself justice. In this book, my book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, I talk a little bit about this and use the language of I call personal justice, the work that we do to take care of ourselves, to pay closer attention to ourselves, that then can translate into making change in the world.
And how to do that in a group so it's not individualized.
And that's, I feel like the best questions that we bring to anything are questions that we can come up with provisional ways of languaging what an answer is. But the answer is really something, if we see the question rightly, we're called to live in ways that do our best to approximate what the answer might look like here and here and here. So how do we do it in groups? It looks one way in the classes that I teach. It looks another way in some of the sessions that I offer for meditation for hundreds of people. It looks another way in the writing that I do. I think it's really when we honor the hard, big, good question, what does it look like to go from personal practice to collective practice? What does it look like here? It can look like, again, one thing in these spaces where we're a group of 4 women of different ages and backgrounds trying to make our way into a conversation. It may look different in a course. It may look different over a lifetime. I think some questions like this one are the kinds of questions that should inspire each of us to figure out, what does it look like for me to bring this? Can I bring it through my scholarship, my photography, my being a social worker, my raising kids? There is no one way, I think, to answer this question.
No,
but there are a lot of good ways that we can practice experimenting. And I think you've done it in the way that you've been trying to, working to transform what's possible in places of higher education here in Denmark. I've been doing it in bringing courses on mindfulness to law students in the United States, where they get credit for taking a class where they look at what it means to be compassionate and how to cultivate compassion as a lawyer, and then they can take that into the world and have. I have trained law students, a whole generation of law students who've taken classes in cultivating heartfulness and bringing that in. So I consider that an example of how to bring it forward. But I also consider the ways that I get people humming and dancing together and experiencing the joy of being together. I do those things. I just did that at an event a few weeks ago in the U.S. I see that as an example too. So I just feel like there's so many ways to try to experiment with that. What do you think? What's coming up for you?
I'm just thinking about if, like, on a global level, how can we make a calling, like to offer some other solutions, because we all the world, we look to America as a sort of with the biggest weapon and most money, and in Europe the answer now to all kind of problem is to buy more weapons, and
build up our defenses.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's not even a question whether we should buy or not. It's whom are we going to buy from?
Mhm. And how much.
We want to be good friends with America, so I think we will buy from you.
Mhm.
And it's, in my mind, it's just unbelievable that we are so afraid that this is the only answer.
Mhm.
I think that there must be an alternative way for, like, being in the world with more dignity, more love, more compassion.
I agree. There must be.
Mm.
There must be. And if there is to be, it'll have to come from us probably. In other words, I do think the challenge is to transform how we think about power. We've been given to believe that power comes from might. And that is a persistent strain that comes and goes. But we're in a moment where the idea that, you know, that it's might that makes right and power is going to go to the person who has the biggest weapons, that narrative is kind of on its ascendancy again. And I say again because if you look through human history, you just see this coming and going. But there are other ways to respond to fear other than to, when I say other ways, I think implicit in what I'm saying is we respond to fear by saying, well, let's just try to cozy up to the people with the weapons that we think can protect us.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we are doing in
That's
Denmark
what we're
at the
doing.
moment.
Yeah. But the question is, what are some of the other ways to respond to fear? And what can the work of mindfulness and compassion as a discipline, as an area of scholarship and research, what can that help us uncover as alternatives to, you know, those readily available answers about we meet our fear with being able to cause more fear in others. So I do think, you know, there has always been this effort to say you can actually meet fear with love. Not the sort of syrupy kind of, in the U.S. we would say, Hallmark kind of, you know, the greeting card kind of love, but a kind of a fierce vulnerability, a kind of a fierce recognition that there is power in coming together around what we have in common. And maybe it's the only thing that ever really, really creates positive forward momentum for human beings. That is to say, that power that comes from us coming together, putting down our weapons. This is the power that, yes, created the civil rights movements that have inspired in different ways the whole world, right, or different communities around the world, to fight off, to throw off the shackles of different kinds of oppression, right? So whether it's the civil rights movement, the women's rights movements, these have been, they're called movements for a reason. They're movements of humankind meeting each other and feeling the power of common cause and empowered ways of articulating what it is we stand for and who we want to be on the other side of this difficulty that we're experiencing. And so I think of this moment that we're in as a moment, really, that is calling for us to sort of feel our dignity, yes, as we talked about, the care that we actually feel for ourselves and each other, and to connect across all the lines of real and perceived difference. Healing the separations. This is something I talk about in this book. It's something that I was called to join with others in doing after visiting South Africa in 2019 or so. I had an opportunity to go there. And one of the South African teachers really was saying to all of us there, you may be thinking you're teaching mindfulness or compassion, whatever you think you're doing, what you're actually being called to do is heal these separations, all of them. We think we live on different continents. We think we live in different nations. We think we're heal those are ideas.
Yeah.
And so I do think that fundamentally humankind is being called to reconceive of ourselves and what it means to be alive together. The planet is demanding it in what we call the climate crises. The demands of new technologies, which are disrupting so much of the settled ways we had of organizing ourselves. Everything is calling for us to rethink how we see ourselves and each other. And in that, there's fear, because we don't know what we're going to come up with on the other side of that. But there is always also possibility. And what my sort of humble hope is that there is something in the work that we have, all of us here, have found ourselves engaged and drawn to. This work of mindful awareness building, starting with ourselves, but not only for ourselves. There's something in that holds a kind of a key, partly because it is really a way of reclaiming the power of our attention. It's like, we live in a world of distraction, of like competition, of, shiny object over here, do that, be this. Reclaiming the power to place our attention where we'd like to place it. And from that place, discerning how we want to spend our time, how we want to be together, what we want to do in this one precious life that we have. Those are the things that I think are essential to whatever it is that we together may come up with as a countervailing power against the power of fear, against the power of domination. I know the power exists, or we wouldn't be here. It's manifest in our lives that we're around this table having this conversation. I look right now where I'm sitting, I can see beautiful greenery. I think that power is the power that is at the heart of everything that lives. And so we're talking about a greater power than any weapon, actually. And so the question is, how can we really feel our way into living from that? And that is a question I'm going to bring my awareness work to for the rest of my life. And I'm happy to be in this conversation with you about it.
I see you as a leader of such a movement, like bringing new communities and new people to the table, and what are your ideas about how we can sort of have like a real diverse community instead of just saying one thing and doing the same in another package?
I hear you. I think, at this point in my own career and efforts, I think I'm living my way to an answer to that kind of question, how we can make it even more diverse, more inclusive, more transformative. Partly it's showing up in, it may be a little blasphemous to say it here, but in the move I've made to kind of shift out of being a full-time academic, right? So I'm a professor emeritus now. So I'm still, I'm still tied to academia. I still respect and love it. And I do think there are ways that what has been called the ivory tower, right, has been a place where we kind of get ourselves a certain identity, a certain power base and set of platforms and networks. And they are inclusive in some ways and not in others. So finding ways to create communities that literally from the as we would say in the U.S., from the get-go or the jump street, like from the foundation, are open to everybody, is what I'm exploring now. So one of the little places of experimentation for me is I've been called in a way to create a community. I'm calling it Mount Iris. So it's a kind of a community It's an online and it's a hybrid. The idea is for us to sort of start connecting more wherever we are. If we feel called to the same set, it's more of a values and practice based community as opposed to a location or discipline based community. So this is open to people of different generations, people of different nationalities, people of different even types of practices and disciplines. But we gather together online. We get to know each other. We practice together right now once a week on Sundays, twice in the day. People can come together. We try and make it accessible from different parts of the globe, and we have people joining from Australia and Canada and the US and the UK so far. We need to keep expanding it to the global south and to Africa and the different places, different countries in Africa. And some have joined from some of those places as well. But this is to me a place of experimentation where we start using these technologies. The technologies are not all bad. How can we use them to sort of break through some of what keeps us stuck? And how can we find the courage to just say, I may not have all the answers and I may not know exactly what to do, but I can try this one thing. And that's what I'm doing with Mount Iris, which is a goal, has its goal like creating the experience of community that's radically open. And seeing what things can emerge in the real world. So to move from being online, having these experiences where we say, oh, it's possible. It's possible for me to connect with somebody from a culture that isn't mine, doesn't look like me, doesn't, right? We still feel each other's humanity and feel uplifted by being together. We can take that from an online experience into the world. And so hopefully, I hope we'll grow communities where we sort of get the inspiration of that and then go out and do some other practice, because I really hope it to be a place of engaged mindfulness. So we get the inspiration from connection and then we go and do whatever it is we feel called to do, whether it's baking, whether it's, again, landscaping, but we do it from this place of radical openness to each other's common humanity and to being a part of the more than human world, because that's also essential. Right? We can't anymore simply be privileging even humans. We know that is part of what needs to be healed as well. So this is what I'm working on. I'm curious what you were thinking of and you're thinking of, and how we can support each other. That's what I think this moment is calling for.
Maybe if we hum for 5 minutes and dance for 5 minutes, and then every person say something, whatever.
What's arising? What's alive in you? That'd be great. Let's do a little bit of practice.
Should I join you over here?
Yeah, let's do a little practice. Yeah, so maybe we'll begin with sitting and sounding practice. So allowing ourselves to kind of just feel our bodies in these postures that we've chosen for these few minutes of practicing together. So feet on the floor, if you're in a seated posture, or just feeling points of contact between body and chair, or if you're standing or lying down, however you happen to be joining with us, wherever you are. Coming home to the body in this moment. So as we allow ourselves to come back home and rest in this posture that we've chosen, we might also allow the mind to rest on the sensations of sitting and breathing. So maybe taking 1 or 2 deeper than usual breaths. And breathing out in a way that will allow some sound to be released, so that if we were, wherever we are, if we were with you, we could hear the release of the out breath. So again, breathing in through the nostrils, breathing out in a way that allows us to relax and release, and let a sound accompany that. So we are activating this vagus nerve as we do so. And we might invite a sound to continue. Sound can be whatever the body might want to release right now. It doesn't have to sound musical. Placing one hand over the heart and one hand over the region beneath the belly button. Just allowing these gentle places of contact support you, and just feeling the way that an intentional touch can bring forth a sense of compassion and care for your own experience right now. So maybe as we see here, your body is remembering something that you're going through that's a little bit challenging, a moment of anxiety that you've experienced. So just practicing allowing these gentle points of contact, placing a hand over the heart or both hands over the heart. Or one hand there, one hand beneath the belly button. Or you might see what it's like to have both hands at the belly button. Another way to practice this is one hand around the rib cage, one hand around the shoulder. Just feeling, almost just giving yourself a hug. And this is something you can practice wherever you are, whenever you need it. It's a way of calling forth that grandmother energy, that you already belong, that you deserve love and kindness, no matter what you're going through. And now, perhaps if you're willing, the body might want to stand. So maybe just when and as you're ready, you might stand. If you've been in a seated posture, and allow the feeling of the dignity of the length of your body as you stand. Feel points of contact the energetics of standing with feet on the ground if you can do so. And otherwise, you can feel your body in whatever posture and position it can support, whether in a chair, if you use a chair to get around, or lying down is okay. But the invitation is to just see if the body might want to be in some kind of movement to support. Just being with what you're carrying right now. Let your body move to support you in holding and releasing what no longer serves. Letting go of what no longer serves. Yeah. So shaking off. Whew. Sometimes we need to shake off and let go what doesn't serve. Yeah. So just remembering as we bring these gentle invitations to practice with embodied sound, with movement, with letting go, shaking it off, just really allowing us to check in with ourselves. Maybe inquire what's alive in you now, having experienced a bit of movement practice, sounding practice, humming. How is it that you're feeling a little bit of the impact of this practice in your body right now? Is there a word or a phrase that comes up? For me, I'm feeling a little bit more lively energy right now, but there's no right or wrong answer here. Yeah. And as we bring this practice to a close, the invitation really is to give yourself permission in whatever ways feel right for you, to really more fully inhabit your body, feel the dignity of your body, and feel the different ways that you can live and breathe and support yourself in healing through embodied mindfulness practices. Thank you for joining us on this journey of practice today.